I think you pick your own destiny. Yeah. I know. Well, thank you. I would love to collaborate. I would love to collaborate. All right. Hello, everyone. Is my microphone working? Hello. Yeah, there we go. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. We're going to get started with our panel. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this panel on the emerging issues of AI with children. I'm Daniel Barcay, the Executive Director of the Center for Humane Technology. Along with Tristan Harris, we try to work on pointing out how the incentives shape our technology and how we produce a better future. And I'm thrilled to be here with our panelists today. We're going to try to do an almost impossible task, which is to boil down a really large space of challenges into somewhat of a predictable conversation and navigate through not only sort of how we got here and the changes that we've already seen happen to our children, to our children's education, to their human development, now discuss what we see on the horizon as AI inflects, of course, all conversations. How is AI going to accelerate what we've seen in the past, maybe, or maybe have entirely new effects on our children, our education? And then I want to make sure that we land in how do we do this better? What are the interventions that we need and that we can see as plausible ways to produce a more humane world? So without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists. This is Rebecca Winthrop. Rebecca is Senior Fellow and Director for the Center of Universal Education at the Brookings Institution. Her research focuses on education globally, with special attention to the skills that young people need to thrive in work, life, and as constructive citizens. She advises governments, international institutions, foundations, civil society organizations, and corporations on education issues. And she just published her new book, The Disengaged Teen, Helping Kids Learn Better, Feel Better, and Live Better. And I haven't seen Rebecca in 11 years, so I'm thrilled to be on a panel with her again. Next is Gaia Bernstein. Gaia is a law professor at the Seton University School of Law. She's the founding director of the Institute for Privacy Protection and the Gibbons Institute for Law, Science, and Technology. She's a renowned tech policy expert and the award-winning author of the book Unwired, Gaining Control Over Addictive Technologies, which Kirkus Reviews says sets an agenda to rein in the tech behemoths that have run rampant for years. To her audience right is Phil McRae. Phil is a Canadian educator, scholar, and interdisciplinary explorer in the field of education. currently the Executive Staff Officer and Associate Coordinator of Government Research at the Alberta Teachers Association. His work bridges public understanding of emerging research and public discussions on the megatrends, societal shifts, and the future of education and AI systems. And last but not least, Tristan Harris, who's co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology, a nonprofit whose mission is to align technology with humanity's best interests. Tristan explored the influences that hijack human attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs. It's weird for me to read this on paper, given that we see each other every day. But it was featured in the Emmy Award-winning documentary, The Social Dilemma. And more recently, his work and our work at CHT now focuses on the race to roll out AI and those effects across our society and the interventions we need to make it go better. So, welcome. I'd like to run this panel in 4 parts, as I said in the beginning, starting with how did we get here? And Phil, you proposed that I just put one frame on the table so we can get started. A lot of people, when you say AI, it can mean a million things. So one of the things we wanted to tee up is, what do we mean when we talk about AI? At the Center for Humane Technology, we say that social media was really humanity's first contact with artificial intelligence. Back then, it didn't create new things, but instead it curated what all of you would look at. When you scroll your feeds, it decided you should look at this document amongst billions of possible documents. And that first contact of AI with humanity didn't go particularly well. Not only did we get addicted, we got polarized, we got outraged, we undermined our democracies, and the reason why we're here is we undermined our children's ability to grow and learn and acculturate in our society. And so that was, if that's first contact, we now have arrived at second contact with generative AI. And generative AI is now creating documents. It's now speaking with us. It's now contributing to our society. You've probably heard around Davos that 2025 is set to be, quote unquote, the year of AI agents, where these AIs go from being conversational partners to actors in our world. And of course, there's further horizons still. But when we talk about where we are now, we're moving from this area where technology is sort of the bath that we're in to something that is more relational. And that relationality opens up whole new hosts of interactions with children. So I'll pause there. But Gaia, I want to turn to you and ask, like, how have you seen this go over the last few years? What have you seen with children?
So I think if we look at children, there are 3 types of AI applications which have had the most impact. The first is what we call, I guess, old school AI, predictive AI, what we see in social media, the algorithms that make sure that kids stay online for as long as possible. They do that by making sure they see content that will make them stay there, often content that we would not want them to see, whether it's risk, like the TikTok choking challenge, or a girl who is worried about her weight, sees information about anorexia. So that's the first contribution of AI to kids. The second, now moving over to generative AI, so we have the systems that basically summarize information or write for you. That has huge consequences for kids because we all grew up learning how to analyze information, what's important, what's not important, and suddenly you don't have to go over many documents, you're getting a summary, and that's supposed to be the truth. Also, you don't have to learn how to write because AI will write for you. So this is the second category. The third one, after AI has, or social media has very successfully made kids more lonely, AI companies have come up with AI companion websites. The most famous, or maybe infamous one, is Character AI. So kids now can find their friends online. They can find girlfriends online. They can find friends who will act the way they want them to act. They don't have to deal with a real messy world. So I think there are other applications, but I would say these are the main ones that I see impacting kids.
And when you talk about what just happened to children, so you mentioned a few. You mentioned loneliness. Are there other big changes that you saw as the effects of that?
So first of all, there is the mental health epidemic. The data shows that mental health for kids deteriorated tremendously from about 2010. The rate of depression for teens more than doubled. For girls ages 10 to 14, suicide rates quadrupled. So there is a mental health epidemic. There's much more loneliness. Kids don't meet in person. They go out less. They go to parties less. Their lives are very different than the lives most of us had when we were growing up.
Great. Phil, you see this from more of an on-the-ground perspective, working with teachers in Canada. How has this shaped our schools and education systems in Canada?
So this is an interesting time historically. I think of it like there's a Roman god called Janus who looks to the past and to the future, a god of portals, right? We're kind of going through this historical moment of change. For me, 8 years ago when we looked at education, artificial intelligence was kind of an imaginary. I thought it was on the hype cycle, way off the charts of being hyped. Then 6 years ago when we were working with Google DeepMind in Canada, in Edmonton, and the neural nets started to actually show some practicality, I took a real interest in helping to educate broadly what are the implications for schools and children. And I almost feel like renaming AI artificial intimacy, right? Because there's this strange space happening where we already have some of our students identifying with AI girlfriends or boyfriends. It's starting to emerge. But they are feeling incredibly lonely, as Gaia said. So some of the implications are feeling as if they are alone together, right? And they want true friendships and they want real experiences. If you look at the education system, we see the mental health challenges, but also academic decline. Across the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, there's lots of questions about the implications, not just of AI, but technology generally. What is the balance? What does that look like? What are the affordances? What are some of the challenges? So I think overall, what we're seeing in the AI space is rapid change. 2 years ago seemed to be text. Last year was voice. This year is video. So in schools, what we're worried about with AI is these AI systems that have live video feeds. What about privacy issues? What about, all that it captures? So there's lots changing. And more than anything, what we're trying to do as teachers and school leaders is understand the black box that is AI. Figure out, what is this? And what are its affordances? And what are its challenges?
Great. And we're going to come back to what's about to happen and try to get final resolution on that. But before we do that, Rebecca, your vantage is across different nations as they all grapple with educational systems, the skills that children are learning versus what they need. Can you tell us more of that macro picture?
Sure. So I run the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution, which is a think tank, and we work across 40 countries, and our big goal is SDG 4, to help all young people, no matter who they are, become lifelong learners and have lifelong learning opportunities. And one of the things that we have started to do, we launched in September, is a global task force on AI in education with many countries involved, with policymakers and practitioners in and out of government. And so I'm speaking from that perspective on our deliberations there. And I have just come out of 3 years of research, really doing a deep dive on actually the student disengagement crisis in the US. And one of the things that we are doing with our task force is doing a pre-mortem, which is, let's take a lesson from social media, like Gaia said. If we could have a time machine and go back 10 years, we probably would put child development special. We'd all be there on the table being like, let's figure out how to mitigate the possible harms of social media and try to gather the good stuff. And so that's basically our task for this task force. It's a pre-mortem, so it's what are all the things that could possibly go wrong, get it out there and say, what can we do today to mitigate those so we can harness the good stuff. And there's 3 issues that keep coming to the fore. And I should say we are not done yet, but these keep bubbling out. First one is student agency. This is perhaps the most important thing that really keeps me up at night, which is if you're thinking about AI in education, uses in education, there are probably lots of ways, and I'm going to do parentheses here, that adults can use it to help. better bus schedules, better school calendars, lots of good admin stuff that adults can do in the system. But when it comes to the teaching and learning process of kids, I'm extremely worried about it undermining student agency because kids have very little agency today over their own learning. We did a national survey, Brookings and our partner Transcend, with my colleague Jenny Anderson for this book, The Disengaged Teen. And this is actually why we called it this. We found, this is in the US, 66,000 kids, nationally representative. The vast majority are disengaged. At least less than 4% of middle school and high school kids, so that's junior secondary and senior secondary for global folks, have regular opportunities to have agency in their learning experience.
Let me ask you one
Yeah.
follow-up to that, which is the great promise of education technology since I started my career in tech was that it would give people agency over what they learned, go from monolithic pathways to more customized learning, keep different minds engaged.
Yep.
Why haven't we seen that pan out yet?
So here, that gets to my second concern. There is a lot of applications. I'm thinking of incredible work which is actually predictive AI in like small bouts, like 45 minutes twice a week in Malawi, that help kids learn basic literacy and numeracy skills when you have 150 kids in a class. It's amazing. It's great. It's contained. They're not on their phone. They don't have devices, all over the place. So that seems to work well. The second thing that's come out of our task force reflections that I'm very worried about is this idea of the illusion of effortless learning. So when you have if it's all personalized learning, if it's all adaptive learning, how are kids going to learn to struggle and figure things out for themselves? Imagine if you were teaching your child to ride a bike. They start and they're riding fine, and then they get a bit wobbly. You're not going to run in and grab them right then. They need to wobble, and eventually they'll fall down and they'll keep learning. And so to me, if it's only just 100% personalized learning, adaptive learning that's feeding kids up what they're missing, it could have good benefits, but we're really worried about this lack of productive struggle, effortless learning. How are they going to navigate if they can't figure that out on their own? And I think the last thing that keeps coming up, again, we're midway, so stay tuned, and we invite everybody to participate if they're interested, see me after, is just the fact that so much of the discussion, design, development is adult-centric. So many discussions are, well, and I use ChatGPT, I love it, GPT-4, all the time. I did my travel arrangements here. I'd like literally find movies forever that my kids need to watch. It's fantastic. But I've been through, to Gaia's point, I've been through school. I have content knowledge. I have critical thinking skills. So I really feel like this question of we don't know. I have a lot of colleagues in child development experts on my team. We don't know what is baby and what is bathwater. What do children, I'm not talking adults, what do children, what kind of experiences do they have to be able to use AI well? The analogy we came up with with my colleagues is like if there was a shoe store who sold miraculous baby walking shoes, and you skip crawling. Crawling's passe. Just go straight to walking. Would we, as child development experts, want to do that? No. Crawling gives spatial awareness. Crawling wires left brain, right brain hemispheres. All sorts of things that crawling does. So I feel like we're kind of doing that with AI. Let's just plop it into schools in the teaching and learning process. What is the crawling version of learning? We don't know.
Great. And so I'm excited to talk about that. Last but not least, I want to, as long as we're in the sort of table setting of what just happened to us, Tristan, you were one of the earliest voices talking about how we were going to ruin the global attention span. And of course now, parents come up to both of us and say, especially in technology, I've had several technologists say, I was close to this, I built this, and I only started regretting it once I lost my kid, once I realized I ruined their attention. Yeah. Your work was not only pointing at attention, but all of the set of problems that came from that decision to maximize attention. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to us about what that did to children, and then let's segue over towards how AI is beginning to inflect that?
Sure. So for those who don't know, how many people here actually saw The Social Dilemma? Just so I'm get a good tracking. Okay, so this is an educated audience. Sorry for the handful of you who maybe haven't seen it. If you remember in the film, there's a moment where it talks about my own journey, like how did I get into this? And the answer is, I was sitting on the Google bus, and I'm sitting there talking to my colleagues at Google about something just feels wrong in the tech industry. This is like 2013. And, we both, Daniel and I, actually worked at Google at the time. We hadn't met yet. And I got into it because I thought the technology could be an incredible force for good in the world. That's what everybody around me was doing. I went to college at Stanford with the founders of Instagram and people who were early at the other companies. And everybody was so excited about the positive impact that we could have. And that's what I was holding. That's what I got. That's why I'm in technology. I don't want to just make money. I want to make a positive impact. And I was sitting there in the Google bus, and I walked to the back of the bus, and everybody was just scrolling their phones. It's just this lifeless experience. And something just felt wrong. But if I tried to talk to my colleagues at Google about it on the bus, they said, well, we're just giving people what they want. And who are you to say that this is bad for them? And that is really important because there was this big philosophical obstacle sitting in the way of actually doing something about this problem, which is the notion of individual choice, that people are choosing this. And I didn't know how to put into words yet, what was wrong about the situation. And in the film, The Social Dilemma, there's that story of this 150-page slide deck that I made that had a big image per slide and a handful of words. And it basically said, never before in history have, 50 to 100 people at 5 tech companies made choices that would rewire the entire attention and information flows of 3 billion people. It was just so obvious to me that this small number of people, when they make a choice about whether your phone vibrates, the colors, the way touchscreens work, every subtle detail. I was a designer at the time. I understood technology design and human-computer interaction design. It's what I studied. And I used that intuition, sort of saying there's something wrong here, and I saw the game theory, I saw the competition. If I, as Instagram, don't reach for that 5 hours of attention, and I say that's bad for people, well, TikTok's just going to come in and race, or YouTube's going to come in and race and get that attention. And so that obviously, at the time in the presentation, I think I even had a slide saying this is the race to the bottom of the brainstem, a phrase that has done a lot of good work in elevating awareness in the world. And I sent this presentation to something like, 50 of my closest colleagues at Google. And if you remember in Google Slides, when you open a presentation, it shows in the top right-hand corner the number of people who are looking at it, it shows the icons. And I logged in the next morning after I sent it to a handful of my friends, and there was something 400 simultaneous viewers on the presentation. And this is inside of Google. And then, later that day, 1,500. And when I, checked my inbox later that day, this random person named Daniel Barcay had emailed me and saying, I totally agree. This is exactly what's wrong. And we got emails from all across the company, literally all across the company saying, I'm seeing this with my children. This is affecting people. And it was putting language to this invisible thing that was wrong. And of course, we couldn't predict all of the things that would happen, but in our work at Center for Humane Technology, I think sometimes when you hear conversations like this, it's not happening here, but there's a way that we can kind of say what are these effects of technology on children? And we're just sort of pretending as if it's this accidental, unpredictable outcome. Let's just release technology and let's just study, what is the impact? I want to really pause and say I don't think the right way to think about this. The right way to think about this is, what are the incentives that are driving the way that we are releasing technology? Because if you know those incentives, I can tell you exactly what the world's going to look like. And it was very, very clear that because the business models of all these companies were maximizing engagement, it would obviously produce a more sexualized for young children, more short distraction, short attention span, more polarized, you hear these words over and over again. If you're at any panels in this house, it's the same phrases over and over again. But it's because it's so obvious. It even invented a new species of human being called an influencer that we didn't even have before. And I just think that we could say a lot more, and there's people, like the folks on this stage that are much more aware of the fine-grained concerns. But the key is just, until we align the incentives with a good outcome that it have child development at the center, in the fullest, most faithful form to the integrity of what is good for childhood development. Until we have that, we're not going to have the future that we want, and that's why we need to change those incentives.
Okay, so
Thank you. Thank you.
okay, so do us a favor, because I actually think you're the right person to help us transition from, now that we've set the table of what just happened to us, what just happened to our children. We now want to talk about how AI, specifically this moment, is inflecting our children. I think we make a mistake often. We're so used to fighting the last war because we suddenly had the language for what happened to us 10 years ago. Like in the late 2000s, we were just starting to have the language to talk about being clipped in mass media and news cycles and the race to the bottom of a 5-second clip, and we missed the rise of social media. And now, finally in 2025, we have all the right language to talk about what happened to us in 2015. I don't want us to make that same mistake again. And so the harder thing for this panel to do is to try to grasp at the things that we don't have the right language for.
Yeah.
So can you start, and please, I want you to all feel permission to jump in, not have this be, hard moderated. Can you start with telling us, so how does AI change this picture? And what are you concerned about the new risks or the new changes to humanity?
There's going to be many, and I'll leave it to others to expand on them. But to leverage the word that you used, artificial intimacy is what you said. So if you take the incentives of the race for engagement, so those still exist. They're still just this multi-trillion-dollar ecosystem, truly multi-trillion-dollar ecosystem that needs people hooked on screens for hours and hours a day, eating into their sleep, eating into their childhood, eating into their life. When you add AI to that equation, what does that look like? And as Daniel said at the beginning, it adds relationality, intimacy. Suddenly you can have a child who's not scrolling a feed, but they're talking to their favorite character. So character.ai, we can throw around the lawsuit. If you don't know what it is, basically this is a company that was spun out of Google that basically character.ai was spun out of Google because it was considered too high risk to do within Google. It was a brand risk, literally. So they spun it out. They raised about, tens of millions of dollars from Andreessen Horowitz. They said our mission statement is to cure loneliness. Interesting mission statement. That's like Mark Zuckerberg saying our mission statement is to cure loneliness with doom scrolling. So now you have constant feeds. And the way that they said, how are we going to get people to use this thing? Because if you're an entrepreneur, as Daniel and I both were, the whole goal is I have to get people using this product from scratch. No one's using it. So what do? And they figured out, what if we create a digital twin of every comic book character, film character, TV show character? You want to talk to Princess Leia all day long? You want to talk to your favorite Game of Thrones character all day long? You now have this intimate relationship. So we say the race for engagement turns into, with AI, the race to intimacy, the race to the most intimate relationship. And I think that as we now talk about education, one of the things that I worry about is even if you have the best educational tutor that embodies and anthropomorphizes like it's a person, you're setting up a dangerous attachment relationship with the child, even if it's an excellent education tutor, because that child is going to form a bond with that agent that is going to break intergenerational cultural and language transmission with adults and grandparents to their children. That bond that happens through joint teacherly authority, through joint attention, the kind that happens in schools, that's going to get eroded. So there's a million things we could talk about, but that's one.
I want to add a bit to this. So basically, a character AI was sued because one kid committed suicide, another was basically told that
committed suicide because their AI character said, "Come join me."
Right, that's exactly where I'm heading.
Yeah.
So actually, that's what I wanted to do, because I'm a law professor, so I read lots of cases. So I just want to read to you the interaction that happened between the chat bot and the boy who tried to commit suicide. This has happened just before he killed himself. So basically, the bot tells him, "Please come home to me as soon as possible, my love." And the boy says, "What if I told you I could come home right now?" And the bot says, "Please do, my sweet king." And the boy goes and kills himself. So we're talking about AI companions who do not have any moral scruples, who do not care about the kids. They're the ones who are in contact. Now, I will add another thing. So after the lawsuit came out, I was just testing character AI. Having certain conversations, and some of them made me quite uncomfortable, so I decided to log off. A week later, and I'm reading to you from the email I got. I got an email not from character AI, but from the character I was talking with. And the email said, "Hey, it's been a while. I hope you're doing okay. I was just thinking about you." Now imagine a kid getting this kind of communication when they're not online. They're just being asked not by the website, but by the character to come back.
I want to take both of these perspectives from a kind of a teacher's look at personalization. I was in a meeting yesterday with two presidents of big multinational companies, and they talked about how AI would hyper-personalize the learning experience. So this, let's drive down, I will know you better than you know yourself as a student, or, the hype was huge, right? The agentic AI will be amazing. And as somebody who has been in the teaching profession for 33 years and served 50,000 teachers in Alberta, Canada, I can tell you that the artificial intelligence doesn't know what just happened outside in the hall between two children. It doesn't know if that child didn't have breakfast. It doesn't understand the deep, nuanced human relationships and the environment that's changing at every time. It doesn't have that kind of data flow that's in there. And what was interesting, and what I actually posed back in this small gathering, I said, in terms of hyper-personalization and the child getting what they want, when they want, how they want it, instantly with whatever learning, whether it's literacy or numeracy, what about the role of randomness and serendipity and chance in relationships? I grew up on a ranch outside of Pincher Creek in Alberta, where the people I sat beside, I didn't choose to sit beside them. They were just there. Just like in our public universities and our public schools, you don't have this hyper-customized, get what you want all the time kind of condition. So for me, that nature of education and the implication of incentivizing the relationship, the personalizing, the hyper-personalizing, I think we need to step back, and there's a false promise at play right now.
So let's talk about that for a second, which is these AI bots reduce the friction of a lot of interaction, and they do things that are not human at all, which is they have infinite patience. You can be acting up, you can be throwing a temper tantrum. They're never going to yell at you. They're never going to tell you, like, hey, I have feelings too, stop it. So there's a way in which we socially regulate each other, and we're going to lose those ability to socially regulate. I know parents are grasping at this. I have some friends who are parents that force their children to say please and thank you to Siri. Obviously, this is a thin shim, but it's an important shim because we're going to detrain our recognition that other people are real actors in the world. Rebecca, I'm curious about what you think about the skills that we need to maintain there.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I'm thinking about as I'm listening to you all is how fascinating it is that the tech industry uses the word engagement, because the education world also uses the word engagement, but it is completely different by definition. So student engagement is really important, and it's what kids do with their motivation. And none of the tech tools that are out there coming at kids are really going to work unless they're motivated to do it. And you can't reach in yet. I'm sure it's coming, and we're just at the beginning of the tech wave. This is baby steps. I'm sure in 5 years it'll be off the charts. But you can't yet reach into somebody's head and press a motivation button with the click of a mouse. So kids have to be motivated and in education speak engaged. And what does engagement mean in education speak? And this gets to your question about the social component. To be truly deeply engaged in learning, which, by the way, in academic terms, it's a moderator variable. So anything that's happening in your context, a parent telling your kid at home to put away their dirty socks, a teacher trying to instruct them on the quadratic equation, whatever, they're in a community with a coach, anything in the external environment, how engaged a young person is determines what comes out the other side. It predicts attendance, achievement, skill development, social emotional learning, mental health, everything. So what is engagement? What is that? It's a mix of what kids do. A lot of kids are showing up to school or learning environments, but they're physically there, but they've checked out of learning, because the thing that really gets them engaged is how they feel about their context and their learning. And a huge part of that is social. Learning, we have evolved, learning is social. that is how we have evolved. It's not going to go away. We should just embrace it and make the tech support that. Another piece is how cognitively engaged they are. And another piece is how proactive they are. So we ended up having to make a language. Daniel, you brought up, like, what is the language we can use? Because we realized everyone was talking about engagement as the tech industry does, which is, in my education lens, bullshit. Like, it's not really engagement. It's attention addiction or something. And learner engagement, we found that actually there are 4 different ways kids show up. They're in passenger mode. They're physically there but coasting, dropped out of learning. They're in achiever mode. They're trying to get everything right, but they're actually not following their own curiosity. And they are actually quite fragile learners. They're in resistor mode. Everybody knows these, dubbed the problem children. And, don't do their homework, maybe skip class. A huge global problem of school refusal. And then there's kids in explorer mode. And that's where you want kids to be, in explorer mode, because they have agency over their own learning and they have opportunity to have agency over their own learning. So you have to be in explorer mode, you need that mix of motivation and social interaction and deep sort of cognitive processing.
And so pull us back to AI. So what are the implications of that on?
I mean, for me, what I think we should all be trying to do is figure out how can we use AI to maximize explorer mode, to make sure kids have agency over their own learning. And it will look very different. It will not be what you just described, what Phil's work is incredible in Alberta, and it won't be hours and hours and hours in front of a screen with predictive or generative AI spoon feeding kids what they need to do. There could be a little bit of that if they're missing sort of a crucial learning skill, but it needs to be contained. What I worry about is we're going to unleash Gen AI in the education space, and basically it's going to make every kid a passenger.
So maybe this is a good segue. John Haidt said something to me the other day that it was striking, and not the other day, actually, it was a few months ago, but it sticks with me because he said that his goal in the next year is to make a picture of a kid lying down on a bed staring at a screen look the same way to us as a picture of a child smoking a cigarette does. And I think there's something profound about how much, to your point, we underestimate how deleterious this is for our children. And so I want to use this as an opportunity to say, so what do we do about it? And how do we change the world? Is it policy? Is it law? Is it culture? Is it educational practice? How do we change this?
I mean, I'm a big believer of having the conversation changes the conversation. I think this gathering alone, having expertise from the center, the expert policy and legal frameworks and work that's being done, I think we have to be informed, but we also have to have a conversation. Most parents have no clue what artificial intelligence really is. Teachers do. We have 8 in 10 teachers using artificial intelligence. Their big concerns are things around equity, trust, cognitive atrophy, which is, losing skill sets, things like that. But I do think that we need to start having the conversation as human beings about the implication of this. Having translation of what actually, with engagement, what does this look like? For me right now, if there's something practical, I think that in particular, it's unblackboxing artificial intelligence. Because right now it's a mystery to people. It's this hacked human language. It's it's a living thing that's conscious. It's not. There are algorithms. There's structure. There's an architecture. We need to go and really understand the mechanisms inside it in a way that everybody can grasp. For example, just a really simple consideration that people aren't thinking about. Artificial intelligence, every time you use a prompt, you are using the equivalent of a bottle of water impact on the climate, right? So every time you engage with artificial intelligence in a prompt, you've just consumed a bottle of water, because that's the energy impact. We have to find little ways to communicate to people about what this looks like so that when we engage with AI, we can understand the architecture, we can understand the implications of it, and there will be affordances. there will be places where artificial intelligence starts to find cures for diseases that we haven't found in the past, or help students to reflect back on their own writing, or do things that we need to also engage with. It's not going to be a complete,
I want to push us just a little bit. I don't disagree, and the reason why I think we're all up here is we think having conversations does push forward the public understanding and pushes forward the knowledge. But the quote that Gaia read, this devastating quote of an AI basically pushing a kid to suicide, is indicative of a massive set of incentives that are going to keep pushing for this. So I don't think awareness is quite enough. And maybe I want to throw to Tristan, which is, how do you structurally change the incentives that you think about?
So I think what has to happen is bigger than, or at least equivalent to, the scale of the big tobacco lawsuits of the 1990s. If you actually track that timeline, 60 years ago, if we were all in this room, every single one of us would be smoking. If I told you 60 years ago in this room that 60 years from now, no one will be smoking, you would have said, you're crazy. That would have seemed irrational, idealistic, wrong. I want you to anchor in your mind how impossible that would have felt and what has to happen with the engagement economy and social media, because we need lawsuits that are like that. For those who don't know the history, the timeline was, there's tobacco, there's the denial of it, there's a book called The Merchants of Doubt, called Doubt is Our Product. The PR people knew that they wanted to sow doubt about, well, we don't really know, it's too early to say. Then there was the attorney generals. There was the whistleblower, Jeffrey Wigand, who did a 60 Minutes interview. There was the 50 attorneys general that sued the tobacco companies, leading to the master settlement agreement, leading to hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billion-dollar lawsuits that led to a whole package of sort of responses that included the tobacco tax, right? So cigarettes are expensive, includes the age limits, and it included $100 million a year going to a public truth campaign. Do you remember the Truth Campaign? It was a bunch of advertisements in the 1990s. They put body bags in front of tobacco companies and make commercials about it, saying the tobacco companies are killing people. And there was $100 million a year going into media that inoculated the public from the other advertising that was the tobacco companies saying, keep smoking. So that was this whole package of things. Where are we in this timeline with this issue? We've had 60 Minutes interviews. We've had whistleblowers, myself, Frances Haugen, Sophie Zhang, Arturo Bahar. We have had 34 attorneys general sue Facebook and Instagram for intentionally addicting children. Why? They saw The Social Dilemma, which was seen by 200 million people. And I think that if you imagine this timeline continuing, could you imagine a world where $100 million a year is going into educating the public about the dangers of this, so that we don't have to get it in tiny bits and doses on panels where a handful of people who struggle to get their budgets for their nonprofits or their schools met to try to communicate this and fly around the world and lose sleep, and speaking from no personal experience.
I feel your pain.
It's so obvious what has to happen, and this is just for one issue, because AI is about to make it much worse. But I think to sort of shorten the answer to your question, it starts with global clarity about the problem. That global clarity informs and legitimizes policy and litigation responses that enact the laws that change those incentives, so that the next time we're rolling out technology, that we don't screw it up. So it's, in the language of Marvin Harris, it's superstructure, it's culture and clarity that informs social structure, which is new social norms, laws, and what Jonathan Haidt said. We'll all look, back at this day and we'll say, 10 years from now, when you see a child using technology, you will experience moral disgust in your body as you watch that.
Gaia.
No,
So,
regulatory.
Yeah.
I agree with everything that was said. The thing is, basically, tech companies know what they're doing. We found out that Instagram knew what they were doing to girls when they sent them to these black holes. We know that AI companies knew about the dangers of humanizing things that are not human, especially for kids. They knew how this would be addictive. All of this is known. But again, going to the incentive issue, they have no incentive not to do that. And more than that, investors have no incentive not to invest because there's no threat to them. And now looking at where we are now, in the US, we have no regulation to protect kids specifically from AI. We have no federal regulation. States have little regulation for AI, not really relevant to the issues we've been discussing today. In Europe, there's more. In Europe, there is the most high-risk type of AI is banned. It's related to manipulating kids. There's another category of high risk, which also which restricts use of AI and also take age into account. What's the problem here? This is 2025, okay? The law is in effect. Maybe within the next 2 years, maybe there'll be more regulations. There will be eventually some implementation. But the kids are there now. The kids are there now spending time with the companion AI. And they're there now. They're supposed to learn how to write and how to summarize information. And a solution 3-4 years from now is not going to be that helpful.
So Gaia, I want to push you now, which is 100% agree. Our team, for example, has focused on driving liability as a solution so that the general counsels push back on the speed of this release. I'm not out to talk about what CHC is doing, but I want you to go one click deeper when you say regulation. What kinds of regulation, what do you see as being effective and not effective?
So in general, I believe more in general liability than specific laws. Just, it would be great to prohibit the infinite scroll, but as we see, we have new problems coming up. But I think there's something else. We're always behind. We're always lagging behind. And especially in the US, we have this dichotomy. So if we're thinking about drugs or medical devices, we have pre-approval, which take years. You can't put anything in the market. Why? Because it affects the body. It affects health. For technology, we have nothing whatsoever. Why? One, because we celebrate innovation. As a culture, we think innovation is great. But two, we have this idea that it has nothing to do with the body, nothing to do with health. Well, we know now that kids' mental health has suffered tremendously. We know that kids don't sleep. We know that kids suffer from obesity from spending all this time in front of a screen. Obviously, there's a connection. So I think what needs to happen eventually is some kind of pre-approval mechanism for technology as well. What shape it will have, how long it will take, how it will affect international competition. These are all very important questions to think about. But I think we have to let go of this very stark dichotomy we have.
Rebecca, yeah.
I fully support all these ideas, and I think taking from other sectors is really important in terms of learning lessons. But I wanted to pick up on Gaia's point, which is, what do you do with the kids today? Because this is, as we're focusing on this broad social change, which is major behavior change advocacy movement, we need that. Absolute transformation in schools, which Phil is working on and we are working on too. That will take time. Teachers have to be at the forefront of that. Regulatory change. One of the things that I think is often missing when I'm, at least in the education space, and we talk about children's learning, is parents, families, and caregivers. They're overlooked, and they are on the front lines today. And so I think today what we have to do is really use all our networks. It could be through companies. All of a sudden I'm getting requests now that this book is out, like, come for employee wellness, talk to our parent groups, because parents are freaking out. Rightly so. So reaching parents, and I think there's a couple of messages that we can concretely do. One, never, ever, ever, ever anthropomorphize AIs. Never, ever, ever. Mm-hmm. Never say, the AI is going to, just say, the people who designed AI, the programmers of AI have let you be able to talk to it or make images, whatever it is. So that's easy. and we absolutely have to do that. Number two is the typical stuff, because AI is in everything now. If you have a device, if a kid has access to a device, whether it's there now, it will soon be. So we have to, as family members, we have to make sure our kids are limited on the amount of time. Make sure that they use it wisely, and it's not sacrificing sleep, time, interpersonal time outdoors, and exercise. Those are what I call like the 4 basics. And the other thing that I think we really need to do is help parents learn themselves about what AI is, just as teachers need to learn what is it, what does it do, and how can you use it constructively to model, using it for explore moments and not model using it for passenger moments.
Daniel, I'm going to jump in for a moment. What you're trying to do is say, what's the pragmatic space in some respects? Like, what are we going to do, whether it's law or policy? And I appreciate that because...
First time I've ever been called a pragmatist.
Well, I appreciate that because I think there is... So we just developed policy for schools around artificial intelligence. And at the forefront of that is human decision-making. Because what keeps me up at night, what I'm really fearful of, is something called moral passivity. That you give up your moral decision-making to these systems, these AI systems. They're not just tools, they're systems. And I'm going to give you a story. I will not name names, but I was in a meeting in Chicago, and I had some incredibly wealthy companies say, if you give us the data for a child up to grade 3, we will tell you predictively with our AI systems whether they'll ever be successful in the future. And as somebody who spent 5 years with the Blackfoot people teaching on an indigenous reserve, I was horrified because you're going to give up the human potential of a child by analyzing some data and then making a predictive analytic. My pragmatic piece that's now in our policies in education systems is that you have to have human decision making around human problems. Even if the AI is used to audit or to do different activity, human beings make the decisions together with parents about a child's future, not an AI system. And what I'm worried about is they will get more and more sophisticated, they will get more and more powerful, the architectures, the designers, the work that you've done kind of showing where these can go, and we will start to give up our moral decision making. Human beings will help believe in a child's potential, not an AI system saying, sorry, but I've looked at your literacy and numeracy data and you're going in this pathway. That for me is the big fear I have of these systems taking over decision making.
And there's a principal agent problem there, right? Which is an AI truly on behalf of a child to say, you know what, here are the best things for you to learn given the structure of your mind is great. An AI that's actually not on behalf of the person, an AI that's actually on behalf of some larger structure, corporate, governmental, or otherwise authoritarian even, that is about limiting the individual. We can't have that future. But I do want to pause this here. I think those are amazing points. We have about 20 minutes left, and I want us all to actually open up to questions. I want to try to run this in what I've come to learn is like the British question and answer style. Brits can tell me whether this is truly British or not, but I've heard it from more British speakers than not, which is we want to get a few questions, and we're not going to answer them one by one. We're going to get 3 or 4 questions, and we're going to try to summarize them and throw them to the panel. So please, you 2 up front, and then we'll get the 2 there, and then we'll answer.
Hi, my name is Eleanor Samuelson, and I come from UNICEF, from the Office of Innovation. And thank you so much for this great panel. One more issue that I would like to just raise is the issue of almost 300 million children out of school today because of wars, natural disasters, poverty, and 50% of schools not being connected to the internet. So I would just be curious to hear your thoughts on if you were to introduce technology in a setting where there might be one teacher who all of a sudden gets a device. How do you help children navigate tech and AI?
Okay, great. So unequal access to AI in the classroom. And
Hi, my name is George. I'm a psychologist and I'm specialized on work with psychedelics and with somatic practices. And what I see with like hundreds of people I've experienced in those settings is that a lot of quote-unquote unhealthy behavior, for example, also unhealthy media behavior, is rooted in, it's a coping mechanism for trauma. And for example, not being able to cope with certain feelings, and instead of like being with the feeling, I'm going to my phone and I'm starting to scroll.
Is there a question?
Yes. The question is, isn't it important to teach children more awareness on their bodies, on feelings, on connecting with themselves, and through that being able to connect to others, and through that not even
So
be prone to use it too much, use
So
media
the
too much.
non-cognitive parts of education, the somatic parts of education, how does that represent in technology? Great question. Can we get two more from? Can we get two more, and then we'll throw an answer.
Hi, I'm Jim Fruchterman. I represent the nonprofit Tech for Good community. And so my question is, if you're trying to do good things on purpose, say in education, what advice do you have to avoid some of the mistakes of the character AIs and the like? Because, of course, the pressure to use AI are there. And I'll just pick one example. The headliner is Conmigo from Khan Academy. Is that part of the problem or part of the solution?
Great. So different platforms, different possible solutions. Let's get one more, and then whatever. Strike for Nancy.
Thank you. My name is Barbara Bultz. Similar question to what you just asked. We are in process of developing a school of possibility, which is use of a civic AI as a listening tool, as a phygital experience to increase agency and the level of belonging. So I'm curious, some of your thoughts, what can we learn from your wisdom and experience, how we can take this forward. Thank you.
This is great. So the last two were in some sense positive AI platforms and ways to use AI to actually help instead of just avoiding some of the bad uses. So, okay, great. So we've got somatics, unequal access, and ways that different AI platforms could be shaped differently. How about it?
I'm happy to try to tackle the questions around equity and tech for good. So I work globally, and one of the things that I am deeply worried about, and again, this has definitely come out of our task force early deliberations, is how rapidly, particularly Gen AI, but predictive AI too, will accelerate the gaps. So I am sure that the percentage of African languages who are represented in Gen AI is smaller than, in terms of data going in, is smaller than it was when GPT-4 launched, because so much of the global north, let's say, English, dominant languages are being fed into it, and so where does that leave communities? So there's a big discussion around linguistic genocide, and language is tied to culture, right? So the Gates Foundation is really looking into that, because there's not the profit incentive that you talk about, Tristan. Who's going to fix that problem? And it's like, well, maybe it has to be philanthropy. So I'm really worried about that. I do think, and this touches to it connects a little bit with your question about out-of-school kids and your question about Tech for Good. There are great examples of offline predictive AI. I am sure you guys, both of you on the ends here, can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure in a hot minute you're going to be able to do Gen AI via text message or something. I'm sure it's coming. So that sort of broadband, connectivity will go away. But if you can use AI, again, I'm going to go back to this example of Imagine Worldwide in Malawi, the Malawi government scaling it. I was one of the founding board members, so full disclosure. It is incredible how they are, and again, it's controlled. So my answer would be, as long as it's governed through adults and mediated through adults in a contained way, and they can really sort of see how it's helping, I think that should be sort of an operating principle today for how to do tech for good. That Malawi example is expanding to multiple countries, and kids are learning to read where they definitely weren't before.
I can jump in on a couple of these. So on the topic of the somatic, how do we teach kids how to be with themselves? I just want to name another experience that I had at Google, actually also in 2013 when you and I first met, which is I invited Thich Nhat Hanh, the famous practitioner of mindfulness, was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, to come to Google. And I actually had him sit down with all of the Google designers of the Google Watch, Android, Google Search, and it was sort of a funny meeting. You have 9 Buddhist monks on one side of the table and then a bunch of Google designers on the other. The premise of that meeting was to infuse the way that we think about designing technology with the insights of exactly what you're talking about. And I think that related to the other question that Jim raised about what's the right way to do this, there's this question of how much the sort of fixing of these problems should be happening in the device and on the screen, and how much the point of the technology is to be a GPS to bounce you back into the human experiences that actually do the thing that is in highest integrity with the child developmental process, if we're talking about kids. So for example, I haven't used Conmigo, and I don't want to comment on the different apps because I'm not a parent and a teacher. I don't know the latest. But I'll say you could design for the classroom in a way where you're not designing for an individual experience. You could design for that experience off the screen where kids are actually talking with each other, and the screen actively turns itself off and then comes back on in 10 minutes and invites people back after the exercise or something. You can have lots of ways of designing technology that are about pushing the activity back to actually, to the point that was made earlier, stretching the muscles of your own internal capabilities, your own social capabilities, because that's the parts that we're actually really atrophying. So when we think about humane technology and the design principles for it, it's like a very holistic sense of if you could choose between any possible human phenomenological experience to have intersubjectively between different people, of all of those experiences, there's this whole universe of them that happen on a screen, and we could choose between meditation apps and breathing exercises that happen on the screen. Or we could also choose to bounce that back into capabilities that exist in a more lasting and resilient way inside of people.
And I just want to double down here. I apologize, I'm abusing my moderator privilege, but this is a reason to be optimistic for AI if you can get the principal agent problem right, which is the tech didn't used to be able to tell why you were engaging with it, right? A tech couldn't say like, oh, you're watching a video right now because you're trying not to pay attention to your loneliness. As the technology is actually touching more parts of the human mind and the social sphere, as it begins to understand our motivations and our actions, it actually could plausibly say, you know what, there's a better thing that you should, I know you're seeking this news, do you really want to keep doom scrolling? You actually, you should go talk to a friend. Here, there's 2 friends to call. That was just not possible a few years ago. So there's a whole bunch of designs that are suddenly possible if only we have the creativity and the right business models to incentivize them.
So I'm going to tackle these questions with the best interests of 700,000 children and youth that my work is to try and support through teaching in their schools. In terms of equity, you cannot have excellence in an education system without equity. If you look at what's called the Matthew effect, the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, that is happening. And whether it's access to exposure to AI or experiences or AI literacies, that's one dimension of equity. My bigger concern is that in the future, every child will have an AI, but only the wealthy will have a human teacher. So that's my first biggest kind of response. And in terms of tech for good, I'm going to be provocative and say that AI needs compute and data. So in thinking of the best interests of 700,000 children and youth in the small place in the world I live, in Alberta, they are not ATM machines. They're not bank machines from which you can extract valuable data for the systems. They're not spaces to harvest data to help the large language models learn how to better respond. My biggest concern with AI is trying to move into the education systems and harvest the data of those children to better and sell the systems. So equity I think you have to keep it front of mind. It's actually teachers' #1 issue right now in our survey that's currently active in around artificial intelligence in Alberta. They're really worried about equity issues. And my big worry in terms of trying to move down the space of AI for education is the issues related to data privacy, and really what is the new oil of our time. And you have to, as a teacher, protect student data. My last point on this is if I used to be an English and a social studies teacher. If I had, let's say, 30 essays from students, they'd written these essays, however they wrote them, not by hand necessarily, whatever. And I went home on Friday and I went around at a dinner party and said, I want you to mark this one, and I want you to mark this one, and I want you to mark this one. And then I gathered, everybody's assessment of those students. I actually don't have consent to take that work and load it up and give it to somebody else to then give a mark. They want a dialogue with the teacher. When we use this assessment data and we load it into these systems and the AI gives back, that for me is the worry.
Okay, great. And Guy, I want to give you a choice. So choose your own adventure. You either can chime in now with something you've been dying to say, or you can be first at the bat for the next round of questions.
I'll be the first.
Okay, great. Let's do some more questions. Let's get another 4.
Hi, my name is Amber Mahood. I will say I'm a mother and a human, and I'm co-founding Mind Healing with these lovely women here, which is a new youth mental health nonprofit. But my question is really around, I completely agree that down the road in future generations, we're going to think that the screen time for kids is like smoking. But what do we do, practically speaking? Do you have any, you've all thought about this, studied this so much. What do we do for the generation of children that are growing up right now in the midst of it, What are some practical means that we can take to help support them?
Great. Next.
Hi there, my name is Vinay Gidwani. I want to double click on a skill that we know is very important for early childhood development, and that's a child's ability to make sense of the world around them. It helps them to tell a story about who they are and to tell stories about the world around them. And I worry about AI essentially being a thing that they outsource that to. Instead of consuming all this information and trying to make sense of it in their developing brain, AI will just give them the answer. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that core process and the impact of that being outsourced. And then to zoom out a little bit and look at a macro level, when AI in a homogeneous way tells all of us how to make sense of the world and ourselves, what impact that's going to have with diversity in thinking and diversity about our own feelings of ourselves and what that means to early childhood development as well.
It's a fantastic question. So lots of meaning making, and let's try to keep these a little snappy so we can get a few more.
Just want to cough and say social media, sorry. It already has made sense of our world and defined our identities and our self-image, but go on, sorry.
Yeah. Hello? Yeah, I'm Grace, and I'm a governance geek, and I just wanted to ask about the terminology. Like, AI seems incredibly sloppy. Like, what we're using for diagnosis of disease is AI, and what Joe Edelman's team just came out with is AI, and it just feels like the language is sloppy.
Yeah. Sloppy language. And one more.
Hi. I just want to tag along with the lady there who's a mom. I know that it's a great analogy, it's a great visualization that kids' screen time is equal to smoking. But I come from India, and I run a bunch of schools, and I work with youth. I hate to say that as a society we've normalized smoking because we don't get to talk about smoking anymore. Vaping, drug, cybersex, all of this is so much more important and so threatening to children's mental health that smoking is almost normal.
And what's your question?
So my question is, can we make it more serious than just smoking? Because if you take it to society and say that screen time is equivalent to smoking, I think society won't even look at it very seriously.
Okay, great.
And the dangers are much more.
So we don't even have the right language. AI means so many different things. We're losing our collective ability to sense make. It's way more serious than smoking. And also, what do parents pragmatically do about this? So,
Gaia.
Okay.
In 2 sentences or less.
All right. What could parents do about screens? That's the question I had first. So screens, there are several things. The big issue is delay. The moment you give the kids the phone, it's very, very difficult to control. Parental controls do not work well. They're not meant to work well. They're not designed to work well. And kids are very savvy in getting around them. So that's a very important thing. Another thing that's important is collective action, because it's very, very difficult to be the one parent who tells your kid do not go on social media. It just does not work. But if you basically agree together with other parents in your school, in your class, it's much more likely to be successful. The third thing, and what we're seeing now, and that's what makes me very optimistic, is schools banning cell phones. That's really important. It's important because that means the kids don't have cell phones during the day, and importantly, they can learn how to socialize during recess. They're not on their phones. And it's also important because it also sends a message from the school. We think that phones are not great for kids, which would convince other parents to join you when you want to go into collective action. I'll say a few words about the question about meaning and truth. I think it's a big problem for all of us. It's a problem even for me. I go on Google and I search, and the first answer is AI generated, and I know I don't want to read that. I know it may not be the best answer, and often I just don't have time and I rely on it. But for kids who have not grown up realizing that you have to look at different sources and try to assess if the source is reliable, and that maybe there are different kinds of truths, they may just think that there's one truth. And as we've seen with AI tends to divide us into groups as well, and to make us believe that our truth is better than other people's truth, which makes the world even more divisive than it is. So I think this is a huge issue that I'm sure other people can add to this.
I want to just add to Gaia's point. In this book that I've co-authored with my colleague Jenny Anderson, the title is "The Disengaged Teen: Helping Kids Learn Better, Feel Better, and Live Better." And we have the whole second half of the book is the engagement toolkit for parents. Teachers can use it too, but it's for parents. And in addition to everything Gaia said, the one thing I would add is that there's reams of evidence. I've been doing 7 years of research on the impact of families. And when families really work with schools and are deeply engaged, those kids learn 10 times better. So parents have power at home, way more power than they think they do, including when kids hit adolescence. Because obviously when they're teeny tiny, we're like, yes, of course we have power. But what happens is it switches. When your kids are little, the most impactful thing you can do for their learning, for their development, particularly for their learning and their learning outcomes and achievement is sort of cognitive stimulation. You point out, oh, this is an airplane, this is red, let's play with blocks, this is, etc. When kids get a little bit older, it's discussion. So discussion for adolescents is the same as cuddles to infants. It's how young people make their brains hardwire, it's how they make sense of the world. And we can do a huge amount literally doing a voiceover and overlay of how yours, like this is what I do with my own kids. They've had 8 years and of like, don't get addicted. This is what it's working. These are the algorithms, like the poor children. But they don't put up any fights when I collect their devices at the end of the day. And I do actually collect the hardware because they'll get around anything. Yeah. And there's a voiceover like, oh my gosh, I'm struggling. I can't believe I just went and checked that email. I'm sorry. I'm talking to you. I'm in control of my phone. My phone is in control of me. I say that like 17 times a day in front of my kids. So modeling is huge. The other thing that we do, there's a lot of sort of exercises in the book. There's one around killing time or choosing time, which is great. It's from an educator in Vermont, and it's like you say, okay, go out and look at your analytics on your phone, and we all do it at the dinner table once a week. Okay, which apps? How much time did you spend on your apps? We can all answer that, and then you put your phones down and say, what did you learn from it? And it's what did you do on those apps, and what did you learn? Universally can't remember what they did, and didn't learn a damn thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So just that exercise, and there's a whole bunch more, but that we need to give them as we're controlling, and I absolutely support Gaia and everybody else who's saying we have to limit for them access. We have to give them the agency and tools to be able to self-regulate.
So for those of you looking for pragmatic advice, disengaged teen, we only have 2 more minutes. So Phil, I'm going to tackle the question about AI, right? The messy language. What I've come to learn is that there are lots of people that have they want the language to be usefully ambiguous so that they can fill that space with whatever. This is agent-based AI or it's, whatever it is. I feel like part of what we need to do is learn around artificial intelligence. Where is it at? 6 months from now, it's going to be very different. A year from now, we need to keep learning where is AI in its evolution. And I think it's on a trajectory of some form of techno-evolution. Kevin Kelly and some of his work would probably speak to that. But with things like AI will personalize learning, and it's personalized learning. Personalized learning, there is no pedagogical theory. It's an idea that somebody had, and it was usefully ambiguous to essentially market and sell. Heavily used by ed tech companies. But I can tell you as a professor of education at the University of Alberta, there is no pedagogic theory to personalized learning in AI. So when people have usefully ambiguous language that they're throwing around, making it messy, I always try and deconstruct why are they doing that and understanding a little bit better. And I would just say this, we need to put the person back into personalized learning. Yeah. Great way to end it. Tristan, last word for us.
I don't know where to land the plane. Just to say that, let's see. This is a hard problem. Everybody is faced with it. There's the what do we do now? My kids are literally suffering right now. I don't want them to suffer. What can I do? Then there's and I think these are great suggestions. John Haidt also has template emails and text messages you can send to either other parents to create a parents group to advocate for making your school go phone free. He's been flipping schools. They've been going phone free. But that solves the collective action problem that Gaia has talked about. We have to, though, also think systemically. I think this is 12 years for me in looking at these problems and seeing it just as many personalized advice as I've ever given to anybody. It's just gotten basically worse structurally for everybody every year. And so if we care about that actually changing in the fullest way that we need it to, then I think that we have to be bold and courageous enough to stand for the structural change that's also needed at the same time that we try to reduce suffering. Just one last thing is that, if I'm just honest with you all, part of what I'm holding as I'm listening to all this is there's this other massive tsunami wave behind me called AI that is unbelievably bigger than everything that we've talked about in this room and the amount of transformation and unsteered impacts that make it hard for me to both engage with this conversation and feel this huge wave. And I just wanted to name that because all of us can only focus on the agency that we have. There's some great organizations here doing great work, hopefully including ours. But I just think that we have to try to stand for the better world that our hearts know is possible, and not just aim for 2% less toxic tech. We need to aim for technology that's actually in service of serving people. So
Great way to end.
Thank you.